It's laundry day, so pile of towels sitting over to the left. And we migrated Kreator's sheepskin that we initially bought for Shamara because Zone loves it a lot. He kept sneaking into Kreator's room to sleep on the sheepskin, causing Mara-chan to start growling. He would ignore it and just loaf on top of it. Ever since I moved it to my bed, he's been in here way more often than not. So good kitten internet, I finally dialed in better settings for my phone recording and also realized that it would look better if my phone was a little bit higher up and tilted. So hopefully this doesn't look too bad. It's another late night vlog because I was busy today. One, trying to get my brain to shut up. Oh gods, so many brain problems lately. But also, two, I needed to catch up on paperwork stuff. So, for instance, filling out more paperwork for leaving this apartment. I have to give notice. Here in Denmark, it's traditional and required, usually, to give 3 months notice before you leave an apartment. So, gave that. I will be out of this apartment at the end of July, which should give a bit of an overlap on moving. We take control over the house in June. Unfortunately, that's not as much of an overlap, or that's more of an overlap than I wanted, but whatever. Also did some prep work for insurance, and the thing I'm going to be talking about today, taxes. I don't remember how much I've covered in a vlog before. I'm pretty certain I have not covered this in VEDA. Possible, though. My tax situation is complicated. And the reason for the complication isn't that I have stocks and bonds and all of that stuff. It isn't because I have some massive complicated tax scheme. Not really, other than the fact that I've lived in 3 countries this year. And I have to pay taxes to all 3 of them. Or technically, I've only lived in 2 countries this year. But the United States is its own special snowflake. So, allow me to explain. For people who might just be watching this, I am an American citizen living in Denmark. I moved here April of last year. So, that means that for the first 3 months and a couple of days, I lived in Norway. Obviously, I was paying Norwegian taxes, I was earning income in Norway, all of that stuff was Norwegian-based. Then I moved to Denmark, and the rest of the year I've been living in Denmark. I have not worked outside of the countries that I was residing in, so from that perspective, it's fairly simple. But the special snowflake part is the United States. You see, I am tax resident in Denmark, which is to say that I primarily own Danish taxes. I've lived here for more than half of a year in the year 2025, so that's where I am considered to be tax resident. However, I am also tax resident in the United States. The reason being is that as a U.S. citizen, you are obligated to pay American taxes, regardless of where you live. There are only 2 countries in the world that do that, and the U.S. is one of them. Also, it is illegal to renounce your citizenship for purposes of taxation. I cannot make this up. I know it's specifically for the, ludicrously rich billionaires, so if they leave the United States, the U.S. can still go after them for taxes, but damn is it annoying as an American citizen. I mean, I know I've said that much before in a vlog, along with the fact that as an American citizen, I am required to report bank accounts for every single bank account that I have access to that has had at any point in its history more than X amount of money in it. I don't remember what X is off the top of my head. I haven't completed the American part of taxes yet. So I have a bunch of paperwork that needs to be done for the US. However, the US requires you to have already completed all of your tax paperwork for every other country that you've lived in first. Fun fact. As most Americans know, taxes are supposed to be complete on the 15th of April. That is tax day for Americans. What most people don't realize is that if you're an expat, you get an automatic extension. And the reason why you get an automatic extension is because you have to have all of your taxes completed everywhere else first. So, for instance, here in Denmark, my taxes aren't completed until the 1st of July. I've submitted them for reference. I'm done touching and futzing and fiddling with them. I'm actually getting tax refunds, or I've already gotten my tax refund from Norway, but I'm getting tax refunds from both Norway and Denmark because holy crap did I pay extra in taxes this year. I'm getting a fairly large amount of money back, in fact. So, allow me to walk you through what it's like to do all of this tax paperwork. And also, I'll give a bit of a comparison between Norway and Denmark, because they do, in fact, do things differently. And for those Americans, you're probably going to be shocked by all of this. So, in the US, what you end up doing for filling out taxes is that you fill out a form called your 1040. At least for being a salaried income person. There are different forms for, like, if you're a sole proprietorship, or you get the idea. But 1040 is the one that most Americans fill out. Either 1040 or one of the variants of 1040, like 1040A or 1040EZ. Don't ask, the IRS is weird. You fill out this extremely long, convoluted form. None of this is filled out for you in advance. You have to have all of that information at your fingertips. And the way that happens is that every company that you have worked for in the past year gives you what's called a Form W-2. Your W-2s are effectively pay stubs for the entire year that will break down how much you've been paid, how much you've paid out in taxes, how much you've paid out in more taxes, because American taxation is weird. Basically, there's multiple tiers of multiple types of taxes that are all still income tax. Anyway, point is, you get all of this information for every employer that you work for. You also get a 1099, if I remember correctly, if you have income that is, like, you're a contractor or something like that. And also you have Form 1099 for other forms of income. For instance, interest on a savings account. You also have other forms for stocks, and you get the idea. There's forms for everything. And all of this is supposed to be mailed to you. Mailed. Up until very recently, snail-mailed. I live in Denmark. I'm not exactly getting snail mail from the United States over any of these things. Although, actually, I have, but whatever. Anyway. Okay, you got all of that. You fill out this form. The form itself is actually not that complicated. A lot of people get hung up on it because there's math involved, and there's a fair amount of arithmetic involved sometimes. But if these are basic taxes, it's not really that difficult to do on your own. It's just laborious, which is the reason why when I was living in the US, I usually used an online tax form thing because I was feeling lazy, and like spending $16 to fill out paperwork for me that's going to take me hours, totally worth it. In addition, you also have to fill out tax forms for the state that you are living in. Luckily, as an expat, I don't count as living in a state, so I do not need to fill out any state tax forms, as long as I wasn't resident in that state for any portion of the year. If I was resident in the state for any portion of the year, the state, because they'll go, you're a resident in the state of Wisconsin for 3 months, and then you lived outside of Wisconsin for the rest of the time, so we're going to tax you for the entire year. That was the reason why I received far less money than I should have from the state of Wisconsin the first year that I moved to Norway, because the state of Wisconsin decided to tax me for 12 months instead of 5 like I was living in. You know, normal American tax things. So all of this information, you fill it out, and when you are done, you submit it to the IRS. If you're doing this online, there's an e-file process that has been partially taken down thanks to the current administration. There's various online tax sites that you can use. You can use an in-person tax representative, or you can just snail mail the thing. Again, I usually used an online site that was a very simplistic one, because it would catch all of the weird exemptions for things. This is another detail that it's in the American system, is that there's a very, very large number of exemptions to taxes. It used to be significantly more detailed. It has changed in the past 8 years or so. So you fill out all of this information, And then the IRS looks at it and compares it with the information that they have. If they care to, they can do what's called an audit, which is where they go, yeah, you're going to need to prove this information. Come talk to us. Audits are, at least as far as I know, I've never been audited. Audits are actually not that scary. There's a lot of public perception, especially through Hollywood, that audits can be horrible, scary things. That's because they are when you lie and cheat and have millions of dollars, like several Hollywood producers might. And yeah, the IRS is fairly powerful, or at least used to be. It's not so much anymore. It's almost as though there's a tax cheat that's currently president of the United States. Anyway, so you go through all of that information, they compare with the information that they already have, and assuming everything's good, you receive your refund or your bill for paying more taxes. If you have to pay taxes, you can split it out into payments. I think you can do up to 4 payments without any interest or anything like that. It's just split out across the year. Taxes are significantly more complicated if you're like sole proprietor business, that type of thing. But I'm just talking about normal income taxes. Also, there's additional forms and so on for interest income and so on, blah, 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 blah. You get the idea. The United States is using a progressive income tax-based system, which means while there is a base amount of tax that is a flat percentage of how much you owe up to a certain amount, so unemployment and Social Security and Medicare are only taxed up to a certain amount of your income, which means, and they're a flat tax up to a certain amount of income, which means they're technically regressive taxes. A regressive tax is where people who make more money pay less tax than people who make less money. And by less, I mean percentage-wise. The rest of the system is a progressive-based tax system, which is to say that people who make less money pay less of a percentage of their income in taxes. It's the way it works for most of the planet. It works that way in the United States as well. The deductions are how all of the rich people end up paying less in taxes than their secretaries. So it's, depending on your situation, potentially many hours of work. For me, it was usually about a half an hour to an hour because my taxes weren't actually all that complicated. Now let me compare with Norway. And this is going to sound very familiar to a lot of Europeans that are watching this because a lot of the European countries do things very similarly. Norway, obviously the Norwegian tax authority is Skatteetaten, knows all of the information about you, just like the US IRS does. And IRS, by the way, stands for Internal Revenue Service. Of course they know everything about you because your employer's been sending them information every month, every time that they pay you. So at the end of the year, you log into the tax website. Usually the tax website has a majorly large amount of a queue set up. Namely, the website gets slammed, too many people hitting it at once, so they sort of phase in people when they get access to things, and there's a line to be able to log in. Once you've logged in using your, as I've mentioned in the previous video, I was about to try to show you my phone, I'm literally talking to it. As I mentioned in the previous video, your national authentication system, in my case, Bank ID, after you log in, you look at it, and they say, okay, this is all the information that we have from you. Can you verify this is correct, yes or no? If everything looks correct, you say yes, and that's it. That is the sum of what you do. In my case, my information was not correct. That's because I moved part of the way through the year. So I had to go through and go, no, this isn't quite correct. This is the full information. So it included, I have to include things like how much do I have in various bank accounts across the world? Because Norway has a wealth tax, which is a tax based off of how much money how much money in terms of cash, assets, deposits, you get the idea, stocks, everything. How much money do you actually have? If you have over a certain amount of money, they start taxing you. And Norway's wealth tax is relatively low. Namely, I actually have to pay wealth tax in Norway. So they had this information because they also get information from my banks and go, yeah, no, you need to pay us this extra amount of money. It's usually factored into your taxes. So maybe your first year in a country like Norway with a wealth tax, you have to pay a little bit at the tax time because, well, you just moved there. They had no concept of knowing how much money you would have in your bank accounts. And the following years, they just take a little bit more out of your withholding for your paychecks. So I had to correct them on a few things, namely, okay, I live in Denmark now. I do have an income in Denmark. This is how much I made in Denmark. This is where my assets are. Plus, also, I have American bank accounts. This is information from American bank accounts. I have less money in there now because I've been draining them because I don't want anything to do with the U.S. This still only took me maybe about 10 minutes. What took me longer was trying to figure out who I need to pay taxes to on what income between Norway and Denmark. The Norwegian tax website is mostly in Norwegian. There's a few spots that are in English, but most of it's in Norwegian, which is fine. I actually don't mind the fact that the taxes are in Norwegian. It actually makes things a little more clear. I'll get to that in a bit. So go through all of that. Again, it took me maybe another... Outside of trying to figure out where I need to put what numbers, which wasn't really the filling out information and taxes fault so much as just trying to figure out the treaty between Norway and Denmark about who gets to take my tax money. After I filled all of that out, it was maybe another 15 minutes. I hit submit. I already got my refund. That was less than a week. Mind you, taxes are not due in Norway until the end of this month. So I've already received my refund before taxes are due, and I was only able to start this process, I think, mid-March. Yeah, Norwegian taxes are easy. Danish tax... Oh, I forgot to mention, Norway has a mostly progressive taxation system, but there are far fewer steps and practically no deductions. So, I'm not going into detail on tax systems because that's out of scope, not really my area of expertise. I would basically just be looking up information and reading it. Norway does have significantly higher income taxes than the United States. But last I checked, I think I was paying 9% more in income tax compared to the U.S. Living in Wisconsin specifically. So that's state plus federal versus... in Norway, it's based off of what region that you happen to be living in, and the region receives the taxes and then pays the federal government the taxes that they owe. So you only have to fill out one form in Norway. Then we go to Denmark. Denmark, very similar to Norway, there is a tax website. There is a queue for being able to log in when taxes are immediately revealed. However, you have, I forgot to mention, in Norway, you have something called a tax card. This is actually somewhat similar to the United States, where you have to fill out information before you start working, which includes things like how many family members you have, how much to take out in deductions, that type of thing. Norway, it's the same type of thing, except that the tax card is just updated whenever you get a raise or change of job, that type of thing. In Denmark, I had to update my tax card repeatedly. And I'll get to why in a bit. But Denmark works in a very similar manner. You have a tax card on their website. You log in, you make sure the tax card's up to date in advance. If there are any changes, you update the tax card then. One difference between the way Denmark works and the way the United States works, and I think it's also a difference between Denmark and Norway, but I'm honestly not sure there, because I didn't have the situation in Norway, is that your property taxes are a part of your income tax. So for 2025, I don't have any property taxes, but for 2026, I do. So when I start receiving my paychecks after I buy my house, I will actually have more of my paycheck deducted for property tax. Admittedly, property taxes in Denmark and Norway are peanuts by comparison to the United States. The US has some of the highest property taxes in the world. Depending on what state you live in. Some states it's actually fairly low. Other states, like Wisconsin in particular, is really high. To give you an idea, I remember my mom and I talking back when my mom was still alive. She owned her house, I owned my house. My property tax for 1 month was greater than her property tax for the entire year. And her insurance for 1 month was greater than my insurance for the entire year. So that's just fun. Anyway, you have a very similar system to actually the United States when it comes to taxes in Denmark. The main difference is that there are 4 tiers of taxes. There's the base tax rate slash... Yeah, I'm going to mess this up. I'm just going to skip that. But anyway, the point is that it's effectively progressive flat taxes. So you pay X amount of percent of income if you make, let's say, I'm making these numbers up, by the way. Let's say you make 100,000 kroner a year or less. You pay 15% in tax on that. This is on top of other taxes like labor market deduction and so on. And then they will have, okay, let's say the level is 100,000 kroner and I'm making 1,000,000 kroner a year. So at 100,000 kroner, you will pay 15%. You pay 15% on everything from 100,001 kroner up to 1,000,000 kroner. And then they'll have another tax layer, the middle tax. Let's say that's at 500,000. So from there, you pay from 500,001 kroner up to your full 1,000,000 kroner, you pay an additional 10% in tax. Then there's a third tier and so on. It's effectively the same way it works in the United States. It's just phrased differently. Instead of it being your marginal tax rate is 27%, it would be you're paying 15% plus 10% plus 2%. It's the same thing. Anyway, Denmark has way more exceptions than Norway. For an example, I actually hire a house cleaner. Neither Kritter or I are very good at cleaning house. We're actually pretty bad at it. And it is one of the few luxuries that I decided to pay for, was I have house cleaners that come here every other week. In Denmark, that's tax deductible. So I actually get to deduct the amount of money that I spend on house cleaners, up to a certain point, off of my taxes. When I added that deduction, I had to update my tax card with the, hey, look, this is the amount of money that I'm spending on house cleaning. I had to do that again when it came to my bonus that I had received. I had to do that again when it came to my raise that I had received. I had to do that again at the start of this year, because Denmark assumes that you have a similar but expanded scope to the previous year. So the previous year, I had X amount of money that I had made prior to moving to Denmark. I had Y amount of money that I had made after moving to Denmark. Because I had lived in Denmark for approximately 8 months, they assumed that the next year, all of my income would increase by 50%, including my income from outside of Denmark, while living in Denmark, so they immediately started taxing me on this theoretical income. It was millions of kroner that they were assuming that I was making. So my taxes for the first few months that I had lived here were brutally high. At this point, very similar to Norway, I'm spending, I think it's about 9% more in taxes than I would in the United States. The main weird thing about Danish taxes is that payroll taxes are extremely low. Payroll taxes, for those that may not know, is the amount of tax that your employer pays based off of your income. See, the United States and most other countries trick you into thinking you're actually paying less taxes than you are. In reality, your employer is paying part of your taxes as well. So your employer might be paying an extra 10% of tax on top of the 27% of tax that you're paying for your, withholding off of your paycheck. You just never see that employer 10%. Denmark has extremely low payroll taxes. It is one of the reasons why I was moved to Denmark. It is the only reason that I've been able to actually figure out that makes a substantial difference, to be fair. Which means that you end up paying more in personal taxes by comparison. In theory, what they're supposed to do is that your salaries should be higher than they are in the rest of the countries, and it does look like Danish salaries are higher than Norwegian salaries. But not by as much as you would think. Anyway, I had to go through this form, I can't even count how many times, because while the form itself is in English, Scott's website is fully in English, except for the help text. So if I, on an English language tax form, click on the little question mark asking me for more details, it gives me a helpful pop-up window in Danish. And because I'm dealing with taxes and tax law and so on, an automated translation is not good enough a lot of the time. So I had to look up a lot of words. I had to ask Creator for assistance because luckily written Danish is very similar to written Bokmal. Just trying to figure out what's going on. And eventually I figured out that I just needed to record things as of the moment that I moved to Denmark on throughout the rest of the year. I did have to give them information about how much I've made in interest. So I think I'm actually... how much I've made in interest until I went back and went, wait, no, they actually have a thing that says, hey, look, you're adding interest that's in a country that we have a double taxation law with. Check to make sure that it's accurate. And Norway had already taken out money for my interest for my savings account in Norway. So I put it as 0, but I still had to write it in assets. The Danish taxes took me quite a bit longer than my American ones do, but that's only because I don't understand Danish. If I did understand Danish, it would be longer than the Norwegian one, but still way shorter than the American one. Probably more like about 25-30 minutes. And that's only because my taxes are complex, because I live in tax resident in 3 different countries over the course of 1 year. So yeah, that's basically what I've been doing today is taxes. I've finished my Norwegian and Danish taxes. I had started my American taxes, but a certain cute kitty cat, editor me, go ahead and put in the picture, decided to block me from my keyboard to make sure that I couldn't do anything, and was being very cute with his eyes closed, loafing in front of me, between me and my keyboard, so I decided I'm done. I have another couple of months to do my American taxes anyway. So, this was a boring one, but maybe it was informative. I'll talk to you next time, Internet. Bye.